Recording. Here we go. So the very first thing we're going to do today is everybody has some individual time to work on these queries in setlist. We'll take about 5 minutes and just go ahead and get as far as you can. So a couple of things to know about this warm-up challenge is that today we'll be using the setlist app. Any branch and any version should work. Later on in the lesson, you'll need to be able to access playlists. So I would recommend checking out a branch now that has playlist functionality. And then we'll be using Rails DB console to access our database and write SQL. And we'll be using Rails console in another terminal window to write active record and interact with our database that way. So go ahead and take about 5 minutes. Everybody will be individual. You can feel free to turn off your camera and try to get the title of the song with the most plays. This is just kind of a warm up. This should be, these should be queries that are somewhat manageable at this point. These first two shouldn't need joins. The second query is get the 5 longest songs that include the word love in the title, and they have at least 100 plays. And if you are feeling pretty good about SQL and active record and you want to go ahead and try a join before we get into class today, try the spicy problem 3. And if you don't get through all 3 of these or even through one of those, that's okay. This is mostly just kind of orient us and get us back into this like database mindset before we kick off the new content. So let's come back together and continue with the slide deck at 12 after the hour. could take about another minute to wrap up what you're working on. All right, let's start coming back together to look at some more slides and material. Out of curiosity, can I get a hand raise reaction if you were able to figure out the first query here? Get the title of the song with the most plays in either active record or sequel. Cool. Awesome. Did anybody get 2? Figure out the second one? Cool. Anybody get the third one? Was anybody feeling extra ambitious? Okay. Awesome. If the third one looks super confusing right now, hopefully this class will clear up some of your questions. It's a pretty challenging query though. This is mostly a thought exercise to kind of get our wheels turning, so to speak. So talking about joins, this is a very important concept for backend developers in general. It will be very relevant for all of you working in Rails, of course, but the concept of joins and querying a database and joining different tables together to get a certain set of results is a big topic and will continue to be very important as you work in backend languages. So thinking about this, so far, all of our queries, or the vast majority of our queries have involved one table. Example would be song.all. If we wanted to retrieve every song in our database, that's information from one table, the songs table. Filtering out using attributes and columns and specific values for those columns on each record, that with a where, something like that would also only involve one table, right? We're getting songs where a title is exactly equal to something or like something. One table associated with a single record, we can also think of this as looking at data from one table. For instance, if we are trying to get back an artist that is associated with a song, we don't necessarily need to grab information from both the songs table and the artist table because we have an artist ID on our songs table, and an active record, we have that association set up as well. So we're able to just call the artist on an instance of a song. We can also use our associations to do things like artist.songs.count. So that's some extra behavior that active record gives us, but from a database perspective, we're really only involving one table in this query. Sorry, I'm pausing for a second to read Taylor's query that he put in the chat. Wow, very nice job. I don't know who's in WAMP, but you get a party noise. Okay, so we can kind of see how so far we really haven't had the need for a join, right? We've only been grabbing things that are directly associated with a foreign key to one table, or we're just grabbing data from one table to begin with. And as we get into more complex user stories and features, we will need to write queries that have information from 2 or more tables. An example would be find the artists with the songs that have been played more than 100 times. Now we need to find some artists, but we need to check information from the songs table to see the play count, right? So we're wanting to get back entire artist objects, not just the artist IDs. And we're also doing some querying logic and some filtering logic based on an attribute on the songs table. Find all the songs where the artist name contains prints. So for this, we would be looking at every record in the songs table and looking at the artist ID, but then even with the artist ID, we will need another column or another piece of data from the artist's table. So as things become more complex, we will need to start to, if you're looking at like my video, if you're looking at my camera, we have to start to take these tables and find a way to stitch them together somehow or to join them, right? So joins will allow you to make queries using data from 2 or more tables, which is exactly what we're starting to get into the necessity. We're starting to need that behavior, right? And it will pull data from multiple tables into a single temporary table. And when we say temporary, this is being held in memory and in a way that I like to think of as like for the life cycle of the query. You're writing a query in Active Record or SQL, you're hitting return, and then you're getting some kind of value back. And that is possible because behind the scenes, we can't really see or interact with what's going on exactly, but this is the syntax that kind of allows this temporary table to exist with all the data that we are asking for. Even if it's not a persisted table in our database, it creates a temporary table. That's the mechanism for getting that data back. And each row will connect a record from one table to a record in another table. So it'll be a row with data from both sides of whatever 2 things you're joining, or more than 2, but we'll start with 2. Rows are connected by matching a foreign key from one table to a primary key on another table. This is a concept that we're probably becoming pretty familiar with, right? And this is how joins works as well. And this is almost always true. You can override this behavior and join on another column or another attribute, but we won't be doing that in mod 2. It's technically possible, but for the sake of what we're learning, we just need to remember that rows are connected by matching up the foreign keys and the primary keys between 2 tables. And each row will contain attributes from both tables. So I'm going to put it on this slide and kind of walk through what we're about to do, but I'm actually going to do this in Postico instead of in Rails DB console, because I think it's just a little bit more user-friendly and easy to read. So we'll be executing a couple of SQL commands and then trying to analyze what did the last query do, or what did these queries do? Really, this last one is, I think, where we'll get into some discussion maybe. And how would you describe the return value of the query? So let's actually do that right now. I'll start from the very beginning of this process. I'm going to, there's a good chance people don't have Postico open, so I'm going to command spacebar and open Postico, and then I'll click connect. And then I'm going to back up a little bit and click on the little elephant that says localhost to make sure, yeah, I was in the wrong database and I want to be in setlist development. Cool. So then we are going to go to the SQL query box here, and this will allow us to write some SQL. And I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. Hello. Is that? That's a lot better. Anybody have issues getting into their Postico and getting to the right database or anything like that? If questions come up at any point, or if I'm moving too fast, please raise your hand. We'll get to you and get that taken care of. But I think this is probably the easiest way to execute these queries and talk about them. So I have the slide deck kind of off to the side, and this is telling me, okay, let's try a few of these queries. So the first one is select all or select star from songs. And I'm going to go ahead and run that statement. And this is what we get back, right? This is our standard songs table. We're getting every song, we're getting every record in the songs table with the ID, title, length, play count, all the attributes, right? We also have an artist ID over here. I could do the same thing for artists, and I could say select all from artists. I'm going to execute that statement. Very similar. All we really have is the timestamps and name and an ID for artists. Cool. So now I'm actually going to run the select both artists.all and songs.all from songs. And in order to be able to do this, we are getting stuff from 2 different tables. So we will need to join artists. And we're joining on where the songs artist ID is equal to artists. Sorry, I can't see with my Zoom windows. There we go. .id. Okay, and I'm going maybe just think for a little bit about what you would expect to populate down here in Postico when I execute this statement. And after I run it, I would like to hear from somebody. How would you describe describe the return value of this query? Anyone wants to raise their hand and take a stab at just describing what this is doing in your own words? Alex.
All right, so it is going to return all of the artists and songs tables. And it's starting off with the songs table, joining it to the artist tables on the artist IDs.
Yep. Well said. And another thing I might add to that is, we get back this temporary table. This isn't a table that exists in our database, right? We get back this temporary table that has information from both, right? That's the only thing I would add to what you said. That all sounds right. Cool. Yeah. Can you all think of maybe a scenario where we would run this query and not see every artist in our database? And you can just like nod or shake your head. What do you think there?
If an artist doesn't have a song.
Yeah, I agree, Alex. Cool. Thank you for that. I think this is good for this demo. I would keep Postco in mind for some of these DB console exercises. If you're running them in DB console and getting something weird that isn't very friendly to read, it might be worth trying it in Postco as well. Yeah, Marla.
I just want to clarify. So this is still a temporary table. It's still separate from like the join table that we create in Rails to like associate things.
Yes, exactly. This is distinct and separate and not related to the join table that we would set up as a permanent or persisted table in our database. And maybe we can even look at that here. And we can see that we have like artists and playlist songs and playlists and songs, but we don't have anything here that is joining artists to songs the way that our query is doing. This is just the return value of the query that I ran. Does that clear it up a little bit?
Yeah, thank you.
Sure. Good question and good distinction to keep in mind. These are one-off queries that we can use however we need to use them. But when we're using joins in Active Record and SQL, these are temporary tables that exist just to give us back this information that we asked for, and then they go away. Cool. Let's keep moving. Okay, so I think what we'll do is I'll go over the instructions for this exploration, and then I will be putting you into breakout rooms to work on this together, and I will let you all manage your own POMs because we'll be out for about 20 minutes, and I think that'll be enough time for everybody to get through this and also take a little break. We started out with a POM too, so I think we might be good for a bit. So what we'll be doing with this exploration is in setlist. Well, first, one person will be screen sharing, and then the other person, or if you're in a group of 3, the other 2 people will do some navigating and try to drive some discussion here. But whoever is screen sharing will open a Rails console and will be executing these commands, and you all should discuss the following questions together. So here's the first command. We'll be interested in knowing what this returns. What attributes do you see in the return value? Which tables do those attributes in the return value correspond to? So we're starting to work with some active record joins, right? We have an artist here, we have some songs here, and we're looking at this return value to see what attributes are there, what tables they correspond to, just kind of like, what does this query spit back out at us, right? And then if you've been following some of the stuff we've done in class, we can see when we execute Active Record that it will print out some SQL. It'll tell us what SQL it ran, and that can give us some valuable information as well. We'd be interested in knowing what SQL does this execute? How are the tables joined? And what is the select doing in that query? So again, you're running the Active Record and then discussing the SQL that happens when you run that. And there are some similar questions in the rest of the slide. for 2 more queries. So there are 3 queries total. One person should be screen sharing, and you all should discuss these questions together because I'm gonna ask to hear some thoughts when we come back together from our breakout rooms. Yeah, I think that's it. Any questions about this activity? Everybody feel good about the setup? Matt?
What would be the optimal branch to choose for this exercise?
The optimal branch would be anything that has, well, actually here, I think you can use any branch that has both artists and songs like completely set up. Later on in the lesson, we'll have some time to explore, including playlist, like queries that include playlists. So probably whatever most recent branch you have readily available should have everything we need.
Okay.
Cool. If you need a reminder of what this activity includes, the slides are linked in the calendar event. So I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to create your breakout rooms. Please hold. Okay, we'll come back probably at about 45 after the hour. Please remember to take a palm between now and then. And use the ask for help feature if you have any further questions. I'll be here.
So we just wanted to confirm what we're seeing in here is right.
Okay.
But for both the second 2 bullet points for like artist.join songs,
Mhm.
it was just returning like an array or an active record relation with an array of artist rows, and it didn't show the songs.
Yep. So this might be a little counterintuitive, but this is exactly what I was hoping you all would observe. And we're going to talk about it a little bit more in detail when we get back together as a group. What I might experiment with, could you scroll down to the second query where you're actually passing some stuff to the select? So artists select artists and songs join songs. See if you can like get in the first instance maybe, or the last instance of the collection that's being returned, and call like something that would be on the songs table, because you're not getting songs back. But if you call this query and then chained on something like .last.title, maybe experiment with that kind of thing and just see what you can find out.
Cool.
Awesome.
Cool. I'm going to hop to another room that asks for help, but y'all are exactly where I would expect.
Okay.
Sweet.
Thank
Awesome.
you.
Duration.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
How can I help? What's happening?
Well, when we are running the, I guess, second bullet point, the artist.select artist songs, all of that, we're not getting any of the song attributes back.
Mhm.
I
We-
saved it to a variable Q1. I'll run it right now.
We don't know why.
Cool. Yep. It's a little counterintuitive, but I think y'all are exactly where I would hope you to be. And we'll talk about why this behavior is doing this when we get back together as a group. But it's good that you noticed this because that's kind of what we're getting at.
Okay.
Mhm.
Thanks.
No problem. I'm
Thank
gonna
you.
hop to another room. See ya.
Hey,
Hello.
Jason.
What's going on?
Hi, we're having trouble with the second query, the
Okay.
artist.select. It's not running as is. It's even as a syntax error.
Okay. What are you running? Like, can we look at that query?
Yeah. Yep. So I'll just go in here. I can do, if I paste it directly,
Mhm.
you can see the syntax coloring. It doesn't change. It seems to be having a problem with whatever's going on in the parens there, but if I hit enter,
Yeah, try replacing the pasted quotation marks with ones that you actually type out. Sometimes the copy paste doesn't actually paste the right character for the quotes that we would use for this.
Okay. Yeah, or maybe I could just try to type out the whole thing versus the, just like that.
I think that'll work. Let's try it. There you go.
Ah, look at that.
Yeah, common gotcha. I should have mentioned it. I forgot, but like sometimes the ones that get copied from like the slide deck or a document or whatever, it's not actually the same character. So, but that looks good now that you got it.
All right.
I'll see.
That was the question. Yeah.
Cool. Well, I'll see y'all back in the main room in a couple minutes.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. Recording. There we go. Great. So hopefully this was an interesting exploration. I'd like to hear from somebody in, let's just start with room 1. Could somebody tell me when you ran artist join songs, what does it return and how would you describe it according to these questions? I think room 1 was Jacob P, Kim, and Sammy. So if any of y'all would care to share, that would be great.
I'll give it a shot.
Cool.
So when we did that, we got a return of the artist ID and the artist name.
Cool.
And then when we tried to set that to a variable and call like the songs from that artist, they weren't available. So it was only the artist ID and name that we got returned.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. So it returned you a collection, it sounds like, of artist data, attributes that belong to the artist table, and you didn't see anything that would correspond to a different table, right? That's kind of what I'm hearing.
Yep.
Great. Okay, thank you. On to the second query. I think this one maybe was, I answered a few questions from people who were running this query and thinking, I'm not sure if I did this right because I'm selecting everything from artists and I'm selecting everything from songs and I'm joining on songs. And the return value isn't exactly what I expect. So I'll leave this open for volunteers. Could anybody tell me more about what you noticed in this query and what it returns? And I'll start by saying you weren't doing anything wrong. This is expected behavior. We're going to talk about why, but could somebody from a different group maybe describe what you got for this query as a return value? Marla?
So when we ran it, we got an array of artists, but it seemed to be that their ID was the song ID they're connected to. And then when we checked attributes, it also looked like they were connected to the song attributes as well.
Interesting. Okay, so I'm going to take a stab at this actually, and Marla, maybe you can let me know if this was, what you observed or if I'm doing anything differently. So we had artist, select, and then we put in our quotes artists, all columns on artists, songs, star for all columns on songs, and then joins songs. This looks like what you ran, correct? Right, Marla?
Yeah, I'm double checking, but I think so.
Okay. No problem. I'll hang out here for a
that
second.
looks like what we ran.
Great. So I'm going to run that and then I'm going to pretty print this so that we can read it a little bit easier, hopefully. And can you just repeat what you were telling me, Marla, one more time?
So there was like an array of artist instances and the same name of the artist was repeated multiple times, but the ID was different. So it seemed like the ID that was being printed was the song ID that was actually connected maybe to the artist. And we checked that by also doing a song.find with that ID in there, and it seemed like it seemed like that assumption was maybe correct.
Okay, so to maybe demonstrate that, what I'm going to do is look at this last artist in this array that we got back and look for song 19. And that does give us back a song called Can't Make You Love Me by Britney Spears. just to confirm that, I'm going to say artist find 15. So that's an interesting observation too. Cool. Does anybody have, well, let's see, sorry, checking my notes, making sure I don't skip anything. Cool, thank you, Marla. I would like a different volunteer if I could get one I'm gonna start this fresh. I'm gonna say this, and we're looking here at this SQL query. And could somebody describe to me what the select is doing in SQL terms? So this right here, I'm gonna not highlight because you can't really read it that way, but Gunnar?
If I can read this correctly, is it selecting all attributes from the songs and the artist table?
Yeah, I would agree with that. And the interesting thing is we're getting artist objects back, not song objects back, right? So there's something to keep in mind here. I think maybe it's best if I go back to the slides. I'm going to be jumping around a little bit, so I do apologize for that. But to this point, for artist select, artist.splat, artist.all, songs.all, join songs, this is still returning artist objects, which is what a lot of you were noticing in the breakout rooms that I dropped in on. The interesting thing is that these artists will have virtual attributes. So we are selecting, as you noted, Gunnar, we are selecting all the columns from artists, and we're selecting all the columns from songs, and the return value is not giving us song objects. It's giving these are structured as artist objects or modeled. You can think of them as being these pieces of data being modeled as artist objects, but they include virtual attributes. So we could run something like this where I say artist select, and then I do that query that I was asking you all about. And then I grab like one of these instances from that collection that's returned, and I can call play count because we are selecting all the columns from songs. So that would look something like this. I'm just going to do that and then call first play count. And I get the play count for the first song from this query, even though this is not being returned as a song object. It's not obvious to us from the return value that we have song attributes available after this query. So this is a common kind of gotcha or tricky thing about Active Record that it's important to understand. When we are using a very specific select and saying, hey, grab me this stuff, we will have access to it based on that query, but it won't necessarily return us modeled data that reflects everything that we selected the way that it would in SQL. And the reason for this is that Active Record makes a lot of assumptions based on which model you start your query with, including the default select. So the default behavior of Active Record would be, if I did like artist dot joins songs, the default behavior of Active Record here would be to return would be to select everything from the artist table. And if I run this query, I can no longer call .first.play count because I'm joining in order to be able to find the artists that have songs or that are associated with songs, but I am not selecting anything from the songs table. So that's kind of a difference to keep in mind between just using a joins or joining and also using a select statement in your Active Record query. Any questions about that before we move on to the third query I had you all experiment with? Corinna.
So one difference, and I may have copied down the Postico syntax for that incorrectly, but for that second one, we have select artist songs from, and when you run it in here, it says from artists, but when we typed it out, it was from songs. Does that?
Do you mind, do you have it on your screen? Do you mind sharing so we can look at what you did? That'd be great.
So this is what we had in Postico. And so I'm just looking at the from songs there, but when we run it in here, it's from artists.
Gotcha. Yeah, so in your Rails console, you started with the artist model, artist.select, and then you gave it those two arguments, everything from artist, everything from songs, .join songs. And that output the SQL where you're selecting from artists. And that is because, like I was mentioning, Active Record will make assumptions about what to select, mostly based off of what model you start with. So that's why it's selecting from artists instead of selecting from songs.
Makes sense.
Yeah, and then you could write this query the opposite way in either SQL or in Active Record by saying select artist.all, songs.all from artists, join songs, right? You could do that in SQL. Either way will work if you use the correct syntax. But when it comes to Active Record, the default behavior is the Active Record will just assume that you want objects modeled based off of which one you started with, in this case, artist. Does that clear it up a little bit?
Yep.
Sweet. Thanks for sharing. Other questions that have been coming up about this second query, Marla?
One question that came up for us was if there were columns that have the same name. So like name in our Adopt Don't Shop project, like pretty much like shelters, applicants, and pets all have the name column. So when you do a join like that, and you would then do like maybe dot first dot name, what is it choosing to return? Like, how does it choose which column to return? And then how would you access the other columns that it didn't choose to return?
Yeah, good question. And I'll see if I can maybe come up with an example here in our Rails console. Let's see. So the scenario is we have two different tables. Each of them have a name column, and we need to do a joins that involves getting the name back for both of those. So what if we did, I'm kind of like throwing spaghetti at the wall here. I don't know exactly how this is going to turn out, but what if we did something like playlist dot select playlist. I'm going to need to put this in quotes. So what I'm doing here is a SQL snippet, and I would need playlist dot name, and then maybe also artist. This is going to get complicated because now we're looking at three different tables, but for the sake of the example, maybe I would do something like artist dot name, and then I could say joins songs. I believe this will work. No, not quite. But the idea that I wanted to get at here is that you would need to specify which table. And usually the easiest way to do that would be to put some SQL into your Active Record query into the select statement. I don't want to spend too much time here. Maybe we can come back to this question later, because I think it's a really good one, and we can experiment with it a little bit. But the first thing that comes to mind for me is that I know that Active Record is going to default to assuming that you want whatever is on the table you started with. So if we just said select name, I wonder what would happen here. Will this actually be a query? So this is defaulting to giving back the name for the model that we started with. And we started with playlist. So this is giving me back my classics, and summer rewind. So those are all names of the playlist. Yeah, is that kind of a good, does that answer your question somewhat?
Somewhat, yeah.
I'll try to time box this so we're not spending too much time here, but what if I did select, let me go up actually. Maybe I need to do songs, artists. Nope. There we go. So now I'm actually getting back names for artists. I'm not getting back the playlist name, which is interesting. But if I did this dot, another thing that you can experiment with is aliasing columns. This will definitely be something you'll get a chance to practice in probably this project, but definitely future projects. In SQL, you can use the keyword as. You can say, select playlist.star as playlist info, and then continue your query that way and reference the alias that you've created later in the query. So I think that might be a little bit beyond the scope of what we're talking about right now, but you are able to grab columns of the same name just by specifying which table you're grabbing them from, like so. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, that helps. Thank you.
No problem. And maybe we can dig in a little bit more at a later date or a later time. Cool. Let's see, where are we here? Yeah, so let's think about this last query. Could anybody, let's see, we heard from one, who have we not heard from today? Maybe somebody, yeah, I don't know, just somebody who I haven't heard from yet in class today would be awesome. For this last query, song.joins artists, what error does this produce? And how would you fix it? Did anybody get to this last one? Antonio.
Yeah, so the error, sorry, I was messing around. Let me bring it back.
Okay.
Can't join song to association named artist. Perhaps you misspelled it. So we actually kind of ran into this when running the artist select, because we reversed it and did like a song select and then artists.
Got it.
But I think it's recognizing that the relationship between the two, like an artist can have many songs, but a song can only have one artist. So you can't pluralize artists. And if you change it to just singular, then it returns the same as what we saw with artist.joins.
Yep, exactly. So to demonstrate what you just said, I'm going to say song joins artists, plural. And this is the error that you ran into, right?
Correct.
Can't join song to association name artist, perhaps you misspelled it. So to your point, this is utilizing our existing active record relationship to be able to build and execute this joins. So if we go over to, I hope I have this ready. Belongs to artist, singular. So we have an artists table that is pluralized because it's a table, but our association is singular because a song can only belong to one artist, exactly like you were saying, Antonio. So if I do this, I get back something very similar to the artist joins songs, except now it is modeling these as song objects because I started with the song model for my query. Great.
Correct. And then similarly, like with artist joins songs, you can't do a a song joins artists dot first dot name, because it won't return an artist name that way.
Can I push on that observation a little bit and ask you, what would you do if you wanted to get the artist name in this query? What would I need to add here?
First dot name.
Anybody have an idea? I don't want to cut you off, Antonio, but be interested if somebody has a guess of what we would need to add to this query to be able to get data about the artist.
Oh, so are you saying just add in after song, like select?
Yeah.
And then put artists, like all artist table or columns and artist song or song columns.
Sure, let's try it
like that.
There we go. We get back the name of the artist from the first song object that's returned to us with this joins query.
Yep.
Cool. Yeah, let's keep moving. Maybe we'll go for another 5 or 10 minutes and then we'll take a pause. So maybe what I'll do here is present. So just as kind of a recap of everything that we talked about there, and hopefully the stuff that you were observing with your small group, in set list, we opened are we in the right place? We are not in the right place. Give me a second. That's what we just did. So as a recap, artist.join songs knows how to join these tables because we have set up our active record associations. It's possible to do this without associations in SQL by specifying that you are joining and you're joining on a certain column that should match with another certain column. Almost always, this is going to be your primary key and your foreign key. But Active Record will do this for us with a very short and sweet syntax because we have our associations set up to reflect the ID columns and the primary key columns and the foreign key columns that we have in our database. And when you were looking through this, we were speaking about this mostly as this is an array of artist objects, or this is an array of objects modeled as artist objects. And specifically, this is returning an array-like object that is called an active record relation object. And it represents a collection of these objects. You can basically think of it as something that will look and behave like an array. And we talked about getting this active record relation back that had what appear to be artist objects and had attributes related to the artist table, and we did not see any song data returned. And that was because we let active record decide for us what it was going to select. Active record's going to make assumptions based on how we start our query, what we want included in that select statement. And in this case, it was just everything from every column from the artist table. When we moved on to this query where we were explicitly selecting everything from the artist table as well as everything from the songs table, it still returned artist objects in this active record relation object. And these artists have virtual attributes. That's why we were able to get an instance of one, get the last one or the first one from this active record relation object, and then call something like play count or length or title, because we had data available to us from the select about songs. So it wasn't returned to us in the return value. It wasn't immediately obvious that we had that data available to us, but it did create virtual attributes, which are, you can think of them as like methods that make it possible for you to call attributes from that table that you've selected. And these are available on that query. You've made yourself a temporary table that you can run methods on essentially, because it has gone and selected the relevant columns from your database. Okay, I think I'll keep going with, there are just a couple of slides here that we aren't going to spend too much time on, just stuff worth mentioning, and then we'll take a palm. But yeah, first, Michael.
Yeah, I was curious, in the Rails console, when you ran, I think it's that second query, you get pretty limited info. It's just, it's returning, yeah. When you run that same thing in Postico, you get a lot more data than is returned in the console. Is that related to the virtual attributes? Are you essentially seeing the virtual attributes in Postico, like all that additional data that's available to you?
Yeah, let's experiment with that a little bit. So I have hopefully a demonstration of what you're getting at, Michael. So we have song select, artist star, song star, joins artist. And I think to be consistent, maybe we should do this with the artist. I think I have that here. Yeah, we'll just do it this way. This is what's in the slides and in the lesson plan, I think. So we have this query, we're selecting everything from both of these tables, we're joining it so that that's even possible, right? And if I, actually, can I go back and pretty print this? So to your point, we have limited info here, right? We have we have things that look like artist objects, and there's no indication here that I have anything about songs available to me, right? But if I go back up, and I think this is what you're asking, correct me if I'm wrong, but if I were to take this and copy and paste it into Postico, if I were to do this, that's exactly what SQL was run according to our Rails console session, right? So I'm going to make sure that this is, I think these might actually, I don't know for sure. These need to be single quotes, just in case. This is kind of the fun thing about copying and pasting with SQL. Sometimes the quotes that you copy are not the same quotes that SQL will be expecting. I think a couple of people ran into this in breakout rooms as well. Let's just try this query and see where we get. So I'm going to do a quick glance at it and make sure this makes sense to me. Select everything from the artist table, everything from the songs table, select it from artists, and then do an inner join with songs on songs where the artist ID equals the artist's ID. Perfect. Okay. Maybe it doesn't like the single quotes. I always get it mixed up. Let's try that. And I might even need to, nope, that works. So what you're saying, Michael, is when we run this in Postico, we don't have to like do any guesswork or calling of like virtual attributes or anything to get the data from both tables, right? We have our ID, name, and timestamps for the artist, and then we have ID, title, length, play count, and timestamps and artist ID for the song. What I would say here is that this is just a difference in how SQL and Active Record work. SQL is going to always follow the same rules all of the time and generally just be very predictable and strict with the syntax, right? And it's going to return literally everything that you ask for. So if I didn't, I wonder if I could do this. That would give me back very different data, right? And this is kind of what it looks like we're getting back with Active Record. And the reason for that is that Active Record is trying to simplify things, trying to make our lives easier. And Active Record will assume, hey, whatever you start with, this is how I'm going to model the data you're getting back. I'm going to give you back artist objects, but then you will be able to call additional things on these objects depending upon what you added to the select statement. So these things are being selected, they are being joined, but they won't necessarily be returned to you in your return value. You just kind of have to have that knowledge of Active Record to know, okay, I'm selecting these things. So now I have all the columns on this second table available to me. So yeah, the main reason is just convention. That's how Active Record was designed and built, and that's how we should expect to be able to work with it. So sometimes when I'm writing these complicated queries, I like to keep schema RB or a visual schema on hand somewhere, so that if I'm writing a query and I forget, oh, what exactly do I have on songs again? It's not actually going to return them here, right? So that I don't have a visual reference from my return value, but if I'm familiar enough with how my database is structured, then I should be able to know that I can run this query and then say, okay, well, give me the last one and then give me the length of the song. And some of that I think comes with practice and experience, but it is very helpful to know, as we're talking about today, that Active Record by default will just select whatever you start with. I don't know if that actually answered your question, Michael. Any follow-up on that?
No, that answered it. Thank you.
Great, no problem. Let's see. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about types of joins before we take a POM. This is nice to know information. Typically, when we're using Active Record and even for the SQL that we're going to be writing in the mod, we're using inner joins. There is also something called a left join and something called a right join. So an inner join, best way to visualize this is with a Venn diagram. So we have table A, we have table B, and when we run join, by default, it will do an inner join and assume that we mean, hey, I only want records back where there is a match, where there is something on both sides that corresponds to the other side. So in our artists and songs example, this would return back a bunch of objects, but it would only return where there are artists that have a song, like songs that have an artist ID. It would not return like an artist without any songs, for instance, which was one of the things we talked about at the very beginning of class. So this will only return records that have a match or that have something to correspond to the other side with, wherever the Venn diagram, so to speak, overlaps. And this is, yeah, our default join type. This is what we did in our exploration. Only return records that match on the condition. And then the left join and right join are what we would call an outer join. So it's not necessarily going to, it is not going to take out any records that don't have a corresponding record on the other side of this diagram. So it will get all the a left join will get all the records from table A, and it will also get corresponding records from table B, but it will not skip the records on table A that don't have a corresponding record on table B, if that makes sense. It will just, it will assume you want all of table A and also the corresponding records where they exist. And left is the first table referenced in the query. We read left to right. So left join would be the first table that you reference. This is, yeah. So if we did a from artist left join songs, artists would be the left table. And we aren't going to actually go into these examples. If you want to come back and experiment with these later, feel free. But like I said, this isn't super critical knowledge. Vast majority of the time, we'll be interested in an inner join. And a right join is just the opposite of a left join. It'll get all the records from table B, and it'll get the corresponding records from table A, but it won't skip over any records from table B that don't have a table A corresponding record. Okay, let's go ahead and take a palm and come back at 21 after the hour. Okay, once it looks like everybody or mostly everybody is back, we'll jump back into it. Just a couple of more slides before I send you out for some individual work. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and start sharing. Looks like people are making their way back. Cool. So this is a slide I wanted to spend a little bit of time on and mention that this is probably something I'm going to mention again when we get into more complex SQL lessons and the grouping and aggregating class later on. This is a really, really good process to just start getting into the habit of thinking through, in my opinion. So the very first thing when trying to construct a SQL query out of thin air, or an active record query that's particularly confusing, would be to maybe with an active record query, step back for a second and think, okay, well, what SQL do I want to be executed when I run this query, really? And the first step there is, what tables do I need? This is going to determine your from statement when you're writing SQL. So if we wanted to get back, like for instance, the artist with the longest song, we would need everything from the artist table, and we would also need the length column from the songs table and the artist ID column from the songs table. So that would mean that we would need multiple tables. And that's my first indication that I will need a join to get I will need to join these tables together somehow. I will need to run dot joins, or if I'm working in SQL, inner join on something, right? So that's the first step. What tables do I need? Where does this data live in the database? Where am I going to have to go get it from? And then what rows do I need from those tables and what columns do I need? I think you could interchange these. You could first get the columns that you need with a select statement and then filter things down with a where. You could start with your where and then factor in the columns with a select. But those would be the next things to consider. Order doesn't matter as much. It might depend upon the query. Yeah, so once you figured out what tables you need, what rows you need from those tables, what columns you need from those tables, then you can move on to the data formatting. So this includes things like order, like what order do I want these to be in, ascending or descending, by what column, limit, how many of these do I want to return? Do I want the longest 3 songs, or do I want to see all the songs ordered by length, right? Distinct would be the way that you would get back a unique record in that collection. If you're doing a join and you think, oh, there's a possibility that, you know, I'm ultimately getting an artist and maybe multiple songs in this join query have the same artist, so I only want a distinct artist record. So you could include that in your formatting considerations. So this is a really good process, step-by-step, of how to put a SQL query together, or at least start thinking about one if it's a little bit more complicated. Excuse me. Cool. So for the rest of class, I think we'll take probably 20 minutes and then come back together. Actually, this is what we'll be doing for the rest of class. Individually, you all will be working on these queries. I think they start to get really tricky at bullet point 3 when we involve playlists. So in your repo, regardless of which branch you're on, hopefully you're already on a branch that has the concept of playlists included. You might have to create some records in Rails console to see any records actually returned to you when you finish this query. You can go ahead and write the query without any records if that's not as important to you to see the results. But yeah, they do get more challenging at bullet point 3. So if you're feeling very, very confident or want to really challenge yourself, you can skip ahead to bullet point 3. What I think I'll do is at 30, I will walk through the first bullet point so that we can all kind of go through this first one together. I'll solve that one, but first I'll give you 5 minutes to work on it on your own. Yeah, you all have the slides, so I'm going to stop sharing. Let me know if you have any questions.
Is anyone on a branch that has playlists that works?
I'm just on many to many, but I think that literally just only has one playlist. The one we were doing earlier today.
Ah, gotcha. All right.
Okay, my clock says 11:30, so I'm just going to quickly walk through how I might solve the first question here, which is which artists have songs with a length greater than 400? So if I go back to my thinking about SQL queries slide, what tables do I need? Well, I know that I'm going to need songs data, and I also know I'm going to need artists data, and I'm going to have to join those two together somehow. I can think about what rows I need from those tables. And as I kind of just think about that question, I know that my where is going to have to involve something about the length, because I'll need to compare that to 400 and then only grab the ones that are longer than 400. With select, I think what I want to actually select is just everything from artist. I think the active record default behavior of giving me back artist data, because I'm starting with the artist object, that's I think where I will start. And then I also don't think I need to order or limit or anything like that, because I'm just interested in figuring out which artists have songs with that length that's greater than 400. Maybe if anything, I'll add a distinct onto the end once I get it working. So I think that's enough for me to get started on. I'll say artist joins songs, because that will allow me to use some information from both of these tables. And I've determined that I need information from both of them. And then I can add a where. And in order to do some kind of comparison, I'm going to need to put some SQL in here. And I think I can just go ahead and say length, because I don't have, the only length column I have in this query is the length column on songs. Artist doesn't have a length column, so I probably don't need to specify which table I'm getting that from for this. And then I would say greater than question mark. And I think my songs that I have seeded are a little bit longer generally. So I'm gonna say 900 instead of 400, but you would put 400 here. So artist join songs where length is greater than 400 or whatever integer. And I get this back. And let me pretty print that. I'm wondering if I have any multiple artists. It does look like I have run the jewels twice. So I'm going to run this query again with a distinct on the end. Distinct, there we go. And then if I pretty print, I have Run the Jewels, Camp, Prince, and Britney Spears. So now I don't have any repeated artists. And that's how I would solve that one. One thing on the note of playlists that I don't think I mentioned that I probably should is that when we're using joins, we are making use of our associations, right? And one thing that's really nice about Active Record is that there is no limit to how many associations you add here. You could have as many playlists through playlist songs, as many, I don't know, venues through artist gigs, these are indefinite. You can keep adding associations here to utilize in Active Record. So that means that I can, for some of these more challenging problems, I can start with something like artist, or let's see, playlist joins songs. And it knows what I'm talking about. It is able to infer that based on the through association, playlist through playlist songs. I don't have to actually include playlist songs in my Active Record query. But what you'll notice if you're looking at the SQL that's generated, it is doing that for us. It is selecting playlist.all from playlist, inner join playlist songs where the IDs match, inner join songs where the IDs match on the joins table. So just wanted to point that out to clarify that these Active Record associations are very, very powerful, and you can do some very complicated SQL with not a lot of syntax. Taylor.
Could you go back to the code for a second, please?
Absolutely.
So in that self.playCount above method, I have tried to essentially pass in that threshold argument as the second argument to the where so you could use the question mark syntax, but
Mhm.
wasn't able to get that to work. So is that a nuance to the active record where method? Basically, the only way that I've been able to get this to work is string interpolating, just like you're showing here. But just wondering if it's possible to use the question mark syntax.
Interesting. Do you have that available to screen share so that we can take a look at it? If not, that's okay. I
I
was just wondering
don't.
if there was a particular error. And is this specifically for the class method that is defined in our app, in our setlist app, or is this just in using the active record where syntax generally?
The latter. I didn't have a specific example that I can pull up, but
Gotcha.
yeah, just curious because I know that's kind of best practice syntax wise, but just wasn't able to get it to work previously.
Yeah, I guess I'm not sure why that would be. I guess if maybe one world I could see is like, maybe this is actually a string, but that still works. I think Postgres figures out what I mean by that because it's only numbers and it will just convert it to an integer. I think it would depend upon the error, but the syntax should almost always work, assuming that you're passing it like the correct data type for that second argument.
Oh, so maybe I need to string interpolate the variable into that argument instead of just passing a 900 for the example. I guess I'll just have to give it another try later on.
Maybe. Yeah, and if you come across the error again and you want to share your screen so we can debug together, I'm happy to do that.
Cool, thank you.
Sure. Okay, I'm going to be here to take any questions. I think we'll come back together probably at 10 to the hour and just see if anybody has examples to share out with the class. But yeah, that's about it. The rest of today will be work time for the most part. So happy SQLing. Hey, everybody, I know it's a little earlier than I had said, but I think it would be good to maybe get out a couple of minutes early. I know some people might be attending the HTTP review session over lunch, so I want to be respectful of everybody's time and build in time for a POM. So I was wondering if anyone has an example or a solution that they would like to share for either the second bullet point, well, really any of the three. I would like to see at least one person's solution to one of these queries. If somebody would like to share. Did anybody find artists with at least one song with more than 100 plays? Brian?
Well, I think so.
All right, well, let's see.
Sure. So I did, it's probably wrong, but be happy to be corrected here because this is still really fuzzy for me, but can you see my screen?
Yeah.
So I did artist.select artists.all as a SQL injection, join with songs where play count is greater than 100, and then I put a distinct on it, and then I got this. Is that?
Yeah. That looks right to me. I don't see it. Nothing jumps out at me as incorrect. That's probably how I would solve it too. Just thinking through it, like I'm also looking at the generated SQL to kind of check this work. But sorry, what were you saying? Do you need the select?
Do I need to select artist.all if I'm just starting with artist?
So thinking back to how Rails will behave by default, it will assume you just want back objects of the type you started with. So why don't we try it without the select artist.all? It looks like you get back the same thing, right?
Yeah, okay. That makes sense that was not necessary. Okay. I was confused when I was putting it in there. I was like, well, I don't know if I need it. So
Now, if you wanted to like call more information about the songs after you get this result set back, then you would need to explicitly select stuff from the songs table, because just because you're joining to run the query doesn't mean it's available to you after you've run the query. That's what the select is for, if that makes sense. But in this case, your implied select with artist dot is all you needed, because we were just concerned with which artists are associated with this stuff.
okay. But if I wanted to access any of the attributes from the songs themselves, I would need it that way, but then also have songs.all, and then on the back end here, you do your song. Okay, got it.
Exactly. Yeah, thank you for sharing. That looks great. Michael.
Yeah, I was curious in the when it says where, and then you're doing the sequel in there of play count question mark. It seems to work if you do play count and not question mark, just put in the value you want, put all of that in parentheses. Is that just two ways to do the same thing? Is one convention over the other?
Yeah, it's two ways of doing the same thing. Directly putting the integer inside of that string would work just fine. It's more of an active record preference to have the two arguments separated out, and that's for extra security measures. But that's not super important that you do it that way with the two separate arguments with the question mark placeholder and then the value. You might see that syntax more frequently because of the security benefits, but we are not super particular about that in mod 2. You can do it either way.
Thank you.
Sure. Brian, did you have another question, or was that from, okay, just making sure. Michael?
Yeah, when I was attempting to solve it, the dot distinct at the end takes care of it. But let's say you had an example where you were looking for artists that had more than like two songs, like a different number. How would you go about that? Yeah, if you're trying to
at least
pick a specific number.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I haven't sat down to try to write the query, but my guess off the top of my head would be that you would need an aggregate function. Essentially, you would need to group by something, and then you would need to probably order by something on one of the columns from the table you're joining with. I think that might be one to put in the parking lot for now. I think after the grouping and aggregating lesson, it would be a lot easier to accomplish something like that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. Okay, if no one has any other questions, I think I'm going to go ahead and end the class here. You can absolutely keep spending time practicing these if you would like to. It's okay if it doesn't all make sense today, though. This won't be the last time we talk about active record. It won't be the last time we talk about SQL or joins or any of that. So consider today an introduction to some of this more intermediate material. But let's go to Matt, and then after that, we'll go to Caroline.
I was really just interested in that fourth bullet point. The other ones seemed kind of straightforward, but that last one, I'm not sure how to write it out.
Okay. Maybe we'll have time after Caroline's question to workshop it a little bit together. But if not, I would love to see some discussion about that last bullet point in the code help channel and see if maybe people could talk through their solutions there.
Okay.
Yeah, but I will take a stab at it if we have time. Caroline?
Can you reiterate what you were saying about Brian when he was saying that he was kind of optional if he needed the dot select artists, and I think you had said something about like if we wanted to reference, was it songs information later or artist? Can you explain that again?
Sure. Let's see. So I'm going to get rid of what I have in my terminal here. So I believe this was for, well, let's just talk about this more generically, I suppose. So let's say we want to get back a collection of artists that have songs. Yeah, I guess that example is good. At least one song with more than 100 plays. So that would be something like artist joins songs where length or play count, I guess, play count greater than, and I'll demonstrate this syntax, even though I usually prefer the two arguments. So that's our very basic stripped down query. We are getting back artists where that have songs with a play count greater than 400. And that's what we get back. And the reason that this works and gives us exactly what we would expect, we're expecting artist objects, right? Because the question is saying which artists have these conditions. And the reason that that is working is because Active Record will assume that what you want back is objects of the type that you start with, or objects modeled after the object that you started the query with. So if I were doing song joins artist, then it would give me back instances of songs instead. So this is basically implying your select, and you can tell that by looking at the SQL, where the SQL says select artist.all from artists, inner join songs, and then this is where it's the rest of the query is really where it's scoping down which records to return to you, which rows in the database, right? Or which rows in the table. But the artist dot is conveying a select artist dot star. Now, if I wanted to say something like, I want that same query, but I also want the name of the song to be returned. Well, if I did this and I said dot first and then dot title for song title, it would have no idea what I'm talking about, because if you look at our select statement, we aren't selecting anything from the songs table. We're joining with the songs table for some of our where logic, but we're not actually asking for that to be data that's returned to us. So if we wanted to do this, if we wanted to do this exact query, but also get back the name, we also have the names of the songs available, or I'm sorry, the titles of the songs, we would need to explicitly say, okay, yes, I'm starting from the artist, so it's going to return objects that are modeled like an artist, but I also want to be able to, so I also want to select, in addition to artist.star, I also want to select songs.title. And then I can put that into the query. So now instead of doing the automatic behavior that Active Record will do of just selecting everything from the table that you start with, I am telling it to also select the title from the songs table. And that's why I have it available now. Does that clear it up a little bit, Caroline, or do you have any follow-up?
That makes a bit more sense. It's a little fuzzy, but I think that helps me understand how you would isolate song information.
Yeah.
By adding in that select. Okay, thank you.
No problem. Brian.
What's the benefit of doing songs.title? Do you just not need all the song data basically is all?
Yeah, that was my logic. If I needed something else like play count, then I would want to either specifically select that column or select everything from the songs table. It's good practice to only select what you need. But with a lot of problems, you might need multiple columns from both. So I would say that's probably a case-by-case thing as far as deciding what to put into your select statement.
Thanks.
Sure. Jacob?
On the where inside, like the play count, sometimes it's calling the play count on whatever the class would be. So it'd be like songs.playCount. Is that just being extra explicit, saying where the play count's coming from? Like you don't need it there?
Yes.
Okay.
Unless it's ambiguous, unless you are joining on a table that also has a play count, then you would need to specify which one you want. Let's see. And this, I think was it Marla who asked this question earlier. What if I need to get back a name from two tables and they both have a name column? Oh, I thought of an example of how to do this. Shoot, I wonder if I could come up with it in 3 minutes. So for that scenario, we might actually need to be more explicit, like you're describing, Jacob. We might need to say like playlist.select playlist name, and I could use an alias here as p name, and then I could also select artist's name as artist name, joins songs. And then this is what we would call a nested join. I don't have time to get into it right now, but there's a lot of good info in the docs. So I'm saying I'm joining on songs, and then I'm also doing another join for songs to their artist. And then let's see, what else do I need? I think that's all I need. Select playlist name as P name, artist name as A name. What does that give me? So that does give me back an active record relation. And you see that I'm selecting very specific columns, so the return value doesn't seem very helpful here, but I could call the aliases. I could call p_name. No, I couldn't. I have to call the first one. Sorry, you need an actual like instance here. So then I get the playlist name, and if I wanted to call artist name here, I could do that as well. because I made A underscore name and P underscore name available when I aliased these columns in my select statement. So that would be a scenario where you would need to be more specific about which table you're grabbing this column from. Does that make sense, Jacob? Any?
Yep, thank you.
No problem. If you need to head out, go ahead. Caroline, I will try to take your question, but I have to hop off soon too. So what is coming up for you?
Just a follow-up question. So do you have to join songs and artists because you're essentially reaching through artists to get to songs?
Let me think about that. So with the playlist query here that I just ran, we need to do this nested association because playlist knows about songs through playlist songs, but a playlist model has no concept of an artist. So we have to use this nested syntax in order to say, okay, first join my playlist to the songs through playlist songs. That's implied. Active Record knows how to do that. But then if we want to get artist information, we also have to join songs to artists, which is what we're doing here with the songs : artist.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
No problem. All right, thank you, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and end it here. If you have any other questions or solutions you want to thread in code help, feel free to do that. Thanks.